In the door with Au5. So much knowledge in this one. We recorded for nearly 2 hours, cut it down to an hour. Knowledge, so much knowledge. Anyway, let's do it. Let's go in the door with Au5.
For those who don't know, 2 days ago was Austin's birthday, and we were going to sing to you, but then we realized that we're horrible at singing.
It's totally fine. I totally appreciate the thought, though.
Absolutely. How was your birthday, by the way?
It was fun. It was super chill. Going out to dinner with my parents and working on a sample pack.
Awesome. When's the sample pack going to come out?
Not really sure yet. It's going to be through Gravitas Create. It's going to be, well, it's a little bit more than just a sample pack. It's going to be a free fall EP producer pack. So you're going to get pretty much all the samples and like vocals and stuff from all the songs. But you're also going to get some instrument racks and patches for Serum and whatnot. Yeah, it's the first time I'm releasing something that is more than just wave files. So,
what were some of the techniques that you used in this song as far as sound design?
Mostly, I'd say the sound design focus, particularly in this song, is really just the basses. Everything else, like the synths, you have piano sampler, and then you have like some supersols, which is just Serum with unison, some stacked octaves. For the basses, it's the majority of the song, as you can see. It's really all Serum. The thing about this song is I kind of went in with the intention of it to just be like a fun banger. I literally banged it out within a day. I didn't really have time to overthink anything or get like really intricate. I guess because of that process, it turned out to be one powerful, cohesive thing, which I'm pretty stoked about.
Let's check out that main growl you got right there.
Here's the downbeat of the drop. Really all this was, if you go into Serum, these are two wavetables that I made myself, really basic things with Operator. They're FM basses. So I would import wavetables from Operator, and then it's really just a matter of assigning a bunch of different parameters, like the wavetable position, some warp filtering. Here, let me turn off all of the filtering and modulations past all destinations. Let's see what this actually sounds like.
Wow.
So that's the wavetable. It's just a simple FM, I don't even know what you'd really call it, like blaster sound from Operator. It literally takes like 30 seconds or less to make. What you want to do when you're creating a wavetable to import into Serum, you want to use a very low note. I like to use C0 because it's like the lowest note that you can kind of hear tonally. And the reason you want to start out with a very low octave is because if you start with a high octave and import into Serum, if you play notes that are lower than that, you're going to lose fidelity in the high end because it's downsampling. All right, we have an Operator here. All right, so we're at C0, and what I'm going to start doing is start tweaking the levels and the coarse tuning of the higher operators. And I'll start to create automations to create like an evolving effect, so it actually is more than just a static sound, so it's actually wavetable. Something like that, and then maybe I'll add some higher harmonics. A lot of it's just trial and error, and the cool thing about Operator is it's built in. It's very lightweight. It's never going to like lock up your CPU or crash your computer. You can just loop the whole thing, and then basically I like to think of it as like chiseling. It's like sculpting. You get real-time feedback when you loop something over and over, and then you can kind of get a sense of like where you want to go with the sound, what's doing what and whatnot. So. Cool, that's simple enough. So what I'll do is I'll freeze and flatten it and just convert it to audio.
When you're making something like this, is it usually you keep it pretty short? I mean, here it's what, a quarter note, 2 quarter notes?
Yeah, this is just a half note length. Because there's not like a lot of morphing and movement going on, it's pretty much just a linear evolution of the sound. It doesn't really matter. Plus, when you import it into Serum and convert it into a wavetable, you can use one of the morph modes to make it smooth and prevent it from being steppy. I mean, in my opinion, I think this is definitely enough. You don't have to get overly complex before you import a wavetable because Serum's so powerful that you can make it more complex within Serum. Really just what you want is some kind of, I guess, like carrier wave or like some kind of source wave that you can really, that's harmonically rich, it's not too noisy, like a good foundation to effects even more after resampling.
And is that always a harmonic FM ratios, or do you sometimes use the inharmonic ones?
When I'm importing into Serum, I particularly don't like to use the fine tuning or like use fixed tuning. And the reason why is because it makes it more inharmonic, makes the wave more inharmonic. And when you import it into Serum, it doesn't really, when you have inharmonic harmonicities in the overtones, it doesn't really slice the waves properly into a wavetable. I never really got much success doing that. So now that we have the sound here, let's open up Serum.
I love how the original name of the song was Skrillexy Think.
Yeah. All right, so now that we're in Serum, we want to open up the wavetable editor, and the crucial part is what a lot of people do is when they try to import a wave into Serum, they will drag the audio into this little box right here, and then they have to choose what kind of resynthesis method they want to use. Because we're using a static key, the key of this sound is not changing. All we need to do is go into the wavetable editor and go down to the formula parser and then type in the note number. What that's going to do is it's going to create a fixed window size for importing the wave. Make sure your audio is in 44.1 kilohertz because otherwise it won't import properly. If it's in 48, it will. The window size is based off of the samples, not actually the note number.
This is blowing my mind.
We typed in C0, we can import a sound that's played at C0, and it will slice the wave into a wavetable that is perfectly in tune. So now that we have this, let me play it and see how it sounds. Sounds pretty good. And so this only has 32 frames in this wavetable. So in order to make it smoother, we're going to go into the morph table and then morph either crossfade or spectral to preserve the original phases of the wave. Now I have something really smooth and harmonically rich that we can work with. I guess I can go back into the main growl that we had and continue the demonstration from there. So if I enable these modulations again from LFO 1. So what I like to do is I'll take an LFO and I will set it to the trigger mode. So it's basically an envelope that has as many breakpoints as I want instead of it being off. Because if it's off, it will sync up to the, it will free run essentially and sync up to the host tempo. Every time you play a note, it's not going to, it's just going to free run. It's not going to re-trigger every time I play the note. So if I set it to trigger, it's going to restart every time I hit. So what I'll do is I'll create just a simple, like a down ramp with some edges to give it more organic motion. And then from there, I'll just start assigning parameters to the LFO modulation. And as you can see, I have 12 things routed to it. I like to assign everything to one modulation source so everything moves at the same time. And in my opinion, it's just easier to keep track of. And it's when you want to change the sound, like the movement of the sound, you can just change that one LFO or that one modulation and the whole thing just morphs and changes in sync.
Pop quiz, do you know how many things you can map to one LFO?
Is there a limit?
There is a limit. I'm actually,
really?
They might have changed it in the recent update, but I think it was like 25 or 35 because I was like literally mapping it to every single parameter to see what would happen. It maxed out.
Wow, that's cool. I never got there yet. After I do that, what I like to do is I'll create the LFO shape. I'll assign it to the wavetable position. That's really all we have right now. And then I'll turn a filter on. In this case, I like to assign it to either a bandpass or a high pass filter. I knew that I wanted it to be a growl. With the growl, it needs to sound vocally, so it needs to have some type of formant quality to it. In order to do that, you need some kind of filter movement in the mid-range, something that is resonant. I don't really know how to describe it any better than that. If you use a band pass or a high pass with high resonance, you will get the effect of like a vowely sound. So in this case, I mapped this to the resonance and the cutoff and a little bit of the mix so I can get the highs back in. And this is what it sounds like with just the band pass. So I've reduced the mix. You can get more of the highs back in. Yeah, so that's what I had now. So I kind of have that wow sound. And then it was time to go into the effects section and start just throwing all the effects on. So dimension expander, I like to use just because it widens everything up. I like to use it before everything else because you can then distort it and then it affects, it's not just an out of phase delay anymore. It actually, the out of phase delays will be saturated with the mid signal and it will just create a more thicker, wider, fuller sound that doesn't just sound like an out of phase delay. So it's really subtle. Through this call, you can't actually hear the stereo effect, but you can hear a little bit of saturation that is not just mono. It's a really good starting point for something that is also mono compatible as well as something that is wide and sounds full without it sounding like hollow, like just having dimension expander at the end would do.
Did you use your chorus static trick that you did a tutorial on the other day?
I believe I did. Yes, I did. Turning it on.
Which, by the way, for those people who don't know what this is, I'm sure you'll go into it a little bit, but he has, Austin here, he has a fantastic, just unbelievable tutorial that he did that he put on his channel on YouTube, so go check it out. But with that being said, keep going.
Thank you. So then what I did was put the chorus on. What I like to do with the chorus is just the default chorus effect. I'm not really a fan of because it's pretty random. It sounds like watery. It makes a coherent sound more incoherent, which is great for like, if that's what you're going for, like pads and dreamy leads and stuff. But I like to use chorus, particularly Serum's chorus, in a different way. I like to use it as just a static comb filter effect. What you want to do is turn the mix all the way up and turn the filter all the way up so it's virtually not filtering anything, and then turn your depth down. That's the key. If you turn your depth down, it's not going to, these two delays, which is what mixes with the dry signal that change and fluctuate free running, that's what gives it the chorus effect. If you turn the depth down, the delays will not free run. They will just be static. And what this allows you to do is, since you have two delays, they're basically identical signals that you have independent control over their delays of each other. What I did was I had one delay fixed, and then I had one delay modulated to this LFO, so it has the same movement. And then what happens is, as one delay is modulating layered on top of the static delay, you will get a comb filtering effect. And because of being modulated with everything else, because it's just assigned to LFO1, it is going to move. It is going to have the same movement as everything else is. It's effectively a flanger that you have full control over its movement. If I change the delay time for 1, you can hear that it will change the frequency of the comb filtering. I like to have it kind of a very tight sound, so it's very high frequency. It's basically like almost perfectly in phase and then slightly goes out of phase from the original signal, and I think it's a really cool effect. It reminds me of like early Kill the Noise type sound design. It's just super cool.
I can hear from what you just showed us, there's like, that's one of the, at least in my opinion, one of the main elements of the Au5 like trademark sound, that very like, I'm not even gonna try to make it with my mouth. This is one of the huge keys to like really get inside your sound design head, is what I'm understanding, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, for bass design, I mean, I love the effect of the comb filter. People think that it's that I use it too excessively, but I think there's something special about the comb filter, and it's also something that everyone can relate to, whether consciously or subconsciously, because I remember the first time hearing the comb filtering effect was when I was probably like 2 or 3, like the earliest that I can remember. And everyone can experience this. You know, you go outside and there's a jet plane going overhead and you hear this phasing effect, and I'm like, that is such an interesting sound. And what is happening is you're hearing a very coherent signal. Like, it's only, the sound is being emitted from just one point. So what you're getting is basically just like a straight line of sound, kind of like the sun. I mean, it's just the point, you're getting a straight line of sun rather than
the sun reflecting off the wall and then hitting you, kind of a thing.
Exactly. Rather than like, you know, having a speaker in a room that's reflecting off of everything, the walls in the room. Exactly. And so the reason why you get that effect from the jet plane is because when you have the initial signal that is hitting your ears, and then what you're having is the same signal reflecting off the ground and hitting your ears again. If you hear a jet plane go overhead, and if you put your head close to the ground, you can hear that it will change the pitch of the comb filtering. Anyway, that's the same thing that's going on in this chorus effect. It's like you're changing the second delay that is identical to the initial delay. I just thought that was the coolest effect when I was little, and I was like, wow, I don't know, it just has such a visceral effect for me. And so I just like to incorporate it in sounds. And I think like using a flanger, and if you checked out my tutorial, like I go through all the different ways that you can create comb filtering with Serum, like flanger and then unison detuning and stuff. All that stuff is really cool, but I think the chorus, because you can just modulate, you can create your modulation shape of the pitch of the comb filtering. It's just more powerful than anything else.
What other effects went onto this in the Serum panel?
Yeah, I turn on the phaser, and this is basically the same thing. I am using a static phaser and then modulating the frequency with the same LFO. So here's before, here's after. It's just adding more notches into the spectrum. Filter, that's doing a low pass. EQ and compression. I mean, I guess it's pretty similar to how it was sounding before. I think I just had it like perfectly tweaked before, and now that it's kind of out of.
You also did move the wavetable earlier, and so that could.
Oh, that's right, yeah. I mean, it's pretty similar to the original sound. Basically what I'm doing after the filtering is just EQing, which is just adding more vowel movement to the sound, which isn't really something that's audible. And then multiband compressor, which is just blasting it, which is just bringing up the highs a lot more. So yeah, and then there's more stuff that I do after that. I like to use this track that I created, which is, it's a 3-band, I'm creating a 3-band crossover. I have the highs, mids, and lows isolated from one another. This is what it sounds like dry. I put a vocoder on the mid band. What this allows me to do is formant shift only the mid frequencies. If you put a vocoder on the entire sound as just a single band, having the lows, mids, and highs affected, it's going to make the highs sound subdued, and it's not going to be crisp like they were. The lows, you're going to have weird resonance, out of phasey effects. So I wanted the highs and lows to be preserved and sounding crispy and like fat and solid, but I wanted the mids to have formant shifting and changes in the sound. I don't think I actually did much of this in the main growl, but I have another growl down here, which is basically a duplicated version of the main growl with some more tweaks done. What I usually like to do is I'll take one main sound and then I'll duplicate it and then tweak that and change it into a slightly different sound, and then duplicate it and change that, tweak it into a slightly different sound. And that way everything kind of has the same fullness, and it sounds like it sounds like it's from the same palette. It's not just like random, completely outlandish, the contrasting sounds.
So just so that I understand, so what you're saying is that, like, because I've run into this in not only my own production but listening to other people's music, where like they have all these different sounds in there and it's just like it's just too random, it's just too chaos. What you're saying is that you make a sound, you duplicate it, change it, make a sound, duplicate it, change it, so on and so forth. So basically it's all coming from the same sound, so it kind of has like a common denominator between these sounds, and it helps kind of glue everything back together, right?
Definitely, yeah. It's a lot easier. It's like they all come from the same family. It's a lot easier to create a bunch of sounds with diversity from a single sound and have it sound good than create a bunch of different sounds completely independently, like built completely in different ways from each other, and then trying to make those sound and work together cohesively. If I change the format of the vocoder, you can actually hear like the cool kind of movement and stuff you can get by doing this band splitting. Here's the sound without that, and here's the sound with formant shifting. It just adds like a whole nother dimension to it.
And so your vocoding settings, so you just have it set to the modulator.
I'm modulating the just the formant. Oh, and what I'm doing is I'm creating a bunch of notches in these bands. So how vocoder works is basically just like a bunch of bandpass filters, very, very narrow bandpass filters that span the frequency spectrum. And then it's just a filter bank. It allows you to adjust the amplitude of each one of those bandpass filters. So like I can get very specific, and it's basically like a graphic EQ. So if I solo it, I can draw my filter shape and then transpose that filter with formant.
So, but you don't have it routed out to an external instrument, right? It's just an internal.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. I always when I'm doing this effect, you have to route it to. You have to make the carrier the modulator. So basically, it's not being modulated by an external source. Exactly. It's just being. It's just acting as a filter bank. It's just being modulated by itself, really. Oh no. This is turned off. This is actually. What I like to do is, this is mistitled Au5 3-band dispersion. This is originally an effect that I made, which was slightly delaying the lower frequencies, or the low and mid band from the high band, creating like frequency dispersion. That was what I originally was trying to do with the sound, and I was like, I don't really like that effect, so let me just throw a vocoder on it. Because I mean, it's just a band splitter with just delay at the end, so I was like, I don't need the delay anymore. This is not a really organized project, just a disclaimer. I didn't really clean anything up before.
Is there anything past the simple delay or past anything like that that's really affecting the sound at all? I mean, I see you have an amp and some frequency shifting.
So I have the saturator. So saturator with some drive, and I turn the bass down. This isn't actually really doing much. It's just adding more grit to it. It's adding more like low mid harmonics to it. I just wanted it to be like a really powerful sound, nothing too like glossy or like lasery sounding. I wanted it to actually be more like a growl. And then what I like to do is throw an amp on it, throw an amp on a lot of my sounds, because it's basically what a saturator does, but in a much more colored way. And then I'll mix the wet signal in with the dry signal a little bit, because if it's just straight wet, it might be, yeah, it just sounds ridiculous, like just way too trebly and bassy and clippy. So it adds that nice like bright fuzz to it that I like. And then I'll use a glue compressor with the soft clip mode on, and what that's really doing is it's just a limiter at this point, because I'm not doing any compression. It's not really doing anything but limiting it. This frequency shifter, I think, so for the rise of the song, I have this filtering going on, this EQ filtering, which is cutting out the lows, like the sub, and then it's also out of key because of pitch bend getting stuck, but that's increasing. And then I'll use a frequency shifter to not really transpose, but kind of frequency shift the sound up to build more tension. So when it actually drops, it sounds more powerful. So the difference between what you just heard and with the frequency shifter is it's basically a riser within the bass.
From my understanding of what the frequency shifter is you're basically kind of doing the same thing that you were doing with the Formant shifting in the vocoder, right? Isn't that what the frequency shifter does?
Yes and no. A frequency shifter is really just linearly transposing the harmonics in the sound, and what it does is it makes something that is harmonic inharmonic. So it's basically pinching all of the frequencies, or pinching or expanding the frequency spectrum towards the high end, like expanding it from the high end. It creates a very dissonant effect. It's really good for transposing drums because they're not tonal, and it preserves the timbre of the drums. I like to use it in situations where I want to make the sound inharmonic, like during a rise or something, to build more tension. But what the Formant shifting of the vocoder is doing is really just changing the filter shape that I draw. It's not doing any transposition of the harmonics in the sound. It is transposing the filter shape, or it's transposing the filter.
A question that quite a lot of people ask me that I'm sure they're wondering about your track as well. So how are you doing? So you've got loads and loads of little like bass shots running through your drop section. How are you sequencing those? Is it all just based on your intuition, or is there some like structure or logic used to kind of sequence all the little noises?
Like how this is just like a bunch of randomly hocketed.
Yeah. So like, I mean, I can personally see a little bit of structure, but to most people, it's kind of still like a really daunting task to take lots of little noises and try and sequence them in a coherent way.
It looks scattered and complex and disorderly, but really it just comes down to I'll start with one sound and then I'll work from there. So I'll create a drum beat with the kick and the snare, and then I'll create one sound, and that will inspire like what kind of sound and how it articulates the next sound, and then I'll loop that and then duplicate that and then do a little the first part of this drop. It's going to sound a little bit different since I messed some stuff up. This is just one bar. I knew I wanted a down pitch growl and then like some kind of rhythmic sound, rhythmic like wob. Yeah, once I put the second sound down, I don't really know how to describe it. It's just a matter of anticipating as you're creating. When I'm creating a drop, it's like when you have the beat behind it, it kind of forces your imagination to fill in the blanks. The first thing or second thing that comes to mind is usually what I'll try to create, and is the most impactful and the most musical. Yeah, then what I'll do is I'll just create another sound, another sound, another sound, as many sounds as I need and that I hear in my head. And then oftentimes there are sounds that I think there's some tracks like this one, there's nothing even on that one. There's some tracks that I just have muted or just like use once. In this drop, it's mainly just a couple different growls, a couple different blaster sounds, and that's it. I mean, it looks disorganized just because that's kind of how my workflow goes. Like it'll just go down from new sound to new sound to new sound without any particular order. But like as I'm working on the session, I know exactly where everything is, and it's easy to keep organized when you create it from scratch. It's like I don't really need to label anything. It's just kind of like a feeling of where things are in the session and just grab from it. I mean, in my opinion, this is a relatively simple drop. So that is like the main theme of the first part of the drop. So the down pitch growl, the wobs with little growls like in between, like these little guys. And then a turnaround sound, which is this something that is not something that is like pitch bendy. And then the next section is a variation of the first section. Basically, all I did is just copy pasted that and then change the drops or change the downbeat sound to this other thing. This is actually where I use the vocoder Formant effect most in the sound. And then I'll use a variation of the wob sound, the blaster sound. And then the other turnaround sound, which is basically a brother of this, has the same pitch movement. Yeah, just the timbre is a little bit different. And then the next section is basically the same pitch. And then the fourth section is really where everything changes up. It's the switch up. And there needs to be that, and I find that this is a very common drop arrangement in, I don't want to say, but I will, Dubstep. You have 3 sections that are pretty similar. It sets up this theme and this familiarity, and then you have your 4th section, which is the change up, and you're like, whoa, it introduces something new. It's novel. It keeps your mind fresh. And then after that happens, after, you know, the 8-bar phrase, it's just intuitive to go back to the thing that's familiar with some more variation. And it's pretty much just like a copy paste of that with some more tweaks. And then the second section is basically the same process all over again, using similar sounds, so it still sounds coherent, but having a different drop arrangement. So I changed the drums up in this section a little bit. The way I arranged it is the same way the way I built it is the same way I built the first section of the drop. The last section, the A, B, C, D section of the drop is the same as the first part of the drop. So I like to try to find a good balance of repetition and familiarity, and also novelty and complexity. It's a lot easier to write things after you have a palette of 6 sounds and like sounds that inspire you, sounds that like aren't dull. And that's the thing. One of the things is I find it beneficial to basically make your own sample pack or make your own patch preset pack before you go hard with composing. Because if your sounds don't sound good, or if you don't like how your sounds sound as you're composing, it's a lot easier to lose inspiration. And then when you are trying to make the sounds, when you're trying to do sound design while you're writing the arrangement and composition of the song, it's very easy for you to lose that creative flow. Because I think when you're composing, you are in it is like the most volatile and fragile state to be in, because you can lose it too quickly. It's important to not listen to the same thing looping too much, or it's not going to have the same effect because your brain is already familiar with it, which removes you from how someone listening to it for the first time would experience it. So
I agree. So Multiplier actually talked about this. So what you're talking about right now is like, you know, basically taking a project and kind of divvying up the processes at different times. So like how you're saying you go and you do your sound design, so that when you go into the compositional part, you're not really worrying about the sound design because it's already done. You're going to use what you're doing. So I guess Noisia does that quite a bit. I love taking these types of things and putting it into the like real world example. Is, let's say that you're going on a date. Okay. And actually the girl or the boy, whatever, is coming over to your house, and you're making googly eyes, you're having a good time, whatever. And they're like, tell me how you feel. And you're like, actually, I need to go turn the oven on because I forgot to make dinner. All right, that is not the time to make dinner. Dinner was supposed to be made hours ago, and you're supposed to be starting that way before that, right? It's the same thing with sound design. You know, if you're getting into like the intimate part of composition, this is not the time to be like, I wonder what FM would do to this thing. I mean, there's a little bit more leeway with like music production, obviously, but you know, the concept is still there. If you don't have everything set, well, not everything, but if you don't have the majority of things set in place before, it's going to kill the vibe, you know what I mean? And it might take a while to bring back the intimate feelings of composition and everything. So
yeah, no, I totally dig that analogy. It's totally relatable. It's composition. It's something you can't overthink. With sound design, you can overthink as much as you can, like be as cerebral as you need to be, because that's kind of part of like using the tools. I find doing sound design is like, it's a lot more logic based, and composing and arrangement is, you have to, it's much more of a felt thing. It's much more of an intuitive thing. It's much easier to lose too.
Something else I wanted to mention that I've noticed that you and we talked about before, but it looks like here, according to your repetition and variation concept, you got a lot of the pervade system. You and I talked about this, but so for those who don't understand what the pervade system is, it's an acronym. It's PRVD, and so what it stands for is present, repeat, vary, destroy. And so that's what it looks like if we go back to, let's see, the first 8 bars.
It's kind of a fractal of itself. So for instance, like I have, this is like the first part of it, which is like you have the growl and then the rhythmic sound and then like the turnaround. And then that's basically like the theme of that. If I bring it to a 2-bar scale. Yeah, presentation, repeating it, varying it. I feel like the repeating and varying kind of go hand in hand. And then destroying, which is something completely different.
Do it over and over. Like, you're right. It is a fractal, because now that you you're on a 2-bar stanza, it's like that. Then you kind of come out a little bit. Now we're looking at, like 8 bars, and then the 8 bars are kind of like that as well. Every 8 bars.
Same thing, but varied. And then there's a totally different turnaround here, which is the melodic turnaround, which is the destruction of this entire section, essentially. And then it goes into the same thing, but totally different, which is then, more or less the same thing on an even larger scale, with the second drop introducing a totally different kind of like different phrasing and whatnot. But at every scale, that philosophy applies.
Yeah, so one thing I'm curious about is the how you doing the sidechain compression? Because there are a few bits in the track that I was trying to work out whether or not. So yeah, I suppose the almost like the dynamic of the bass sounded like you'd done the form of sidechain compression, where you kind of do it even though the drums aren't there. So yeah, I was trying to work out whether that was sidechain compression or whether you were programming in those dynamics manually.
So how I'm doing it is how I like to sidechain. How I like to route sidechaining, first of all, is by sending my synths and bass groups to a return track, and then setting their outputs to sends only, and then turning up the send level. So basically everything is going through this return track here. Without it's just drums, and this makes it really easy to just put one essentially gain reducer, whether it be a compressor or a gate or like volume shaper, etc., on it, and then have everything done simultaneously just from one plugin. There are advantages to having separate side chains for different groups and different instruments. For a song like this, I feel like having it going through just one bus essentially is going to it just gives it a consistent heavy sound. Since the drums are not really dynamic at all, they're just like kick, snare on full blast. Anyway, how I'm doing this is I'm actually using a gate, and I'm using a sidechain trigger track, which is muted, although the sidechain input from the gate is still picking up the muted track. So this is just the drum track. As you can see, it's just the drum track, and that I have above it. I like to use the drum rack and use MIDI for drums. It just makes more sense to me in my workflow. And then what I do is I created a very simple impulse track, which is just creating a click from operator, making sure that the velocity is consistent and that the pitch is consistent using scale. Alternatively, I could use the fixed button. So it's creating these clicks, these very short clicks. And what I'm then doing is using a gate with the sidechain input being the click track. And you can see in this visual down here, I wish I could zoom this in bigger, but the click is great because it's not biased between whether it's a kick drum or a snare drum, and so it's going to duck and it's going to create the same shape for both drums. The reason I like to use a gate instead of a compressor, at least for this song, is because the gain reduction curves that it creates it's almost like an envelope. You have your attack, you have your hold, and you have your release, and you also have a look ahead too. So you can really fine tune how much, and it's also a much more extreme effect than what a sidechain compressor could do. I'm having the floor be completely negative infinity. So when the drums hit, everything is completely silent for 38 milliseconds. And then in a linear fashion, the gain reduction then just goes back to 0 over the course of 36 milliseconds. And this is just stuff that I tweak to like as I'm listening to it. So for instance, like if I play this and have the hold really high, You just have. I just have a lot of. I just have the control that I was looking for using a gate instead of a compressor. It may sound less natural, but that's what I was going for.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think that was the thing I was hearing. That's because I suppose normally with the sidechain compressor, it doesn't always doesn't always completely shut off the sound, but with this, it gives it a whole different sort of dynamic compared to what most people are doing.
Right, totally. Yeah. Virtual, like listening to Virtual Riot's music. I like a couple years ago. I was so fascinated with like how his drums just cut out everything so abruptly, and then quickly everything is brought back in. It was just like basically a 16th note gate, and I was using Logic at the time that I heard that, and what I would do is create a Sidechaining compressor with very short release time, and then just use like 3 or 4 compressors stacked on top of each other to achieve that effect. But with Ableton, it had the gate, and I think it was last year when I realized like I could just use a gate, because I didn't realize time that it had this little sidechain tab, because I don't know, I never used the gate before, and I didn't use the gate often, and I saw this little triangle compressor had, and I was like, I do the same exact thing. This is great, and it works just like a compressor. The trick is you have to hit the flip button, because otherwise audio will only come through when there is a sidechain signal. When you hit flip, it does the opposite. Audio will come through until there's a sidechain signal.
Dude, your crap punches so hard, it is ridiculous. Why does your stuff punch so hard? I'm assuming that part of it is because of the skate trick of what you showed us right here, but there's got to be something else, because your stuff freaking slams, dude.
Thanks. I feel like there's not really one specific thing that I'm doing that makes it punch hard. Actually, now that you mentioned the gate, I'm really curious to hear how this sounds without any sidechain gating or compression. So yeah, pardon this. Okay, I mean it definitely. This definitely does contribute, that's for sure. Having proper gain reduction for sidechaining contributes to that. But it's a hard question to answer, because it's also a very subjective question. Because to me, it just like, this is just what is normal. This is just the sound that I'm striving for. I don't really think of it as like, I mean, I wanted to slam, but like, I don't know. I think what may contribute to the slamming is everything kind of having its own place. Everything is it's like a wall of sound. I guess that's kind of what I like to achieve. I like to achieve a wall of sound, a wall of frequencies, but have everything have its own place, like fit in, like pieces in a puzzle. Whenever I'm layering something, there always has to be, like if I am to layer something, like layering 2 bass sounds, I will use EQ masking, which is basically cutting where I'm boosting in another, cutting one range in one sound where I'm boosting same range in another sound, and just creating space for other things to fit in together when they're being layered. In this case, there is nothing, like all of these basses kind of have their own place. Like, they're just kind of like blocks that are of just one sound, followed by a block of the next sound, followed by a block of the next sound. And there isn't really anything overlapping. There isn't really any space either, if that makes sense.
So what I'm assuming from what you're telling me is basically you give everything its own space. And the way that you do that is, I'm assuming, one of 2 ways. One of it is compositionally. So we're looking at your arrangement view right now, and I can only see one thing, or I can only see one instance where 2 things are overlapping, and that's with Gritty and 37 instrument, right? And that's probably just adding a tonal thing to it.
37 is actually muted because it's the original sound that I used to resample into the grindy track.
Okay.
So this is effectively muted. So
okay, so then the concept's still there, that like just looking at this compositionally, there's nothing overlapping just from a quick look at it. Everything has its own place. And so I feel like compositionally you can make it have its own place. And then secondly is through, from my understanding, is through EQ. So you can go in and basically chop out everything that doesn't need to be there. Or let's say that, you have these 2 sounds and they're kind of happening at the same time. Like let's say, what's called an impact and a bass growl, right? You can go in and you can kind of like cut the stuff that you want from the bass growl to cut through, and on the same frequencies on that impact you cut out, so like the bass growl can kind of cut through, and basically vice versa, creating effectively a Au5 bass jigsaw puzzle. Not just bass jigsaw puzzle, but compositional, jigsaw puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a very good way to describe it, because I mean that's basically what's going on. Yeah. those are the two main things. And I think as far as the EQ and frequency masking thing goes, I think a prime fundamental example is high passing your basses and then putting a sub in the same key underneath them. I think that's the prime example, because if you don't high pass them and if you put a sub under them, you're going to get phase cancellation where there is those, it's just going to get muddy. You're going to get phase cancellation where there are those frequencies that are playing simultaneously but out of phase or sometimes in phase, and it'll just sound inconsistent. So yeah, on a compositional level and also on a spectral level, and also a dynamics level, everything is tightly fitting together without any real overlap or interference.
In regards to your kick, is there any, or not to your kick, sorry, to your drums, is there anything specific besides sidechaining that you do to make them so punchy?
Yes. Okay. There's quite a few things. Let me see. There isn't really much in this drum rack that I can demonstrate that demonstrates like how I do this, because what I'd like to do is I'll do like a drum design session and then do all my drum design and then render those samples to audio and then just throw them in the drum rack, because it's just saves on CPU, makes things much. But the things that I do is, like for kicks, for instance, I like to synthesize my kicks these days. I like to use Kick 2, the Kick 2 plugin. It's insane. It's basically just a sine wave envelope shaper that also allows you to layer clicks and other types of noise on top of them, and it has a big display that you can really fine tune everything. When I put my rendered samples into a drum rack, a lot of times what I'll do, and for the first half of my EDM career, I never really used to do this until recently, until I guess I switched to Ableton, and it was really easy to do this, is I'll use the filter, but I won't actually filter. I won't be filtering anything out. I will switch it to a different mode than clean, and what that will do is bring up this drive knob, and it's a soft saturator. So here's what it sounds like without any drive. This kick sounds like without any drive. As I start to introduce the drive, it starts to bring in those low mid harmonics. And that is, it sounds bad soloed, which is why I don't think I ever had the inclination to use that before, since I would always design my drums in session. Mm-hmm. But now I realize, like, you can introduce drive and soft clipping to your drums when, and it oftentimes sounds good and musical when it's in the context of the instrumentation, bringing that punch in. And it works especially well for if you're listening to the song on a sound system that doesn't have a really good low-end response or a subwoofer. Those low-end harmonics will give the impression of the full punch.
This is exactly what I was trying to get at. It was this right here, because so Amity, he's been on the show before, he showed me a trick one time. He's like, do this to your drums, it'll make them extremely punchy. And so what he does is he grabs a saturator and puts it on the medium curve preset, which is essentially kind of exactly what you're doing right now, because it's basically soft clipping. It's acting more or less as a very gentle limiter, which I guess technically is a compressor, but basically you're adding drive to it, which increases the punch and adds some higher harmonics, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So back in the day when I used to use Logic, I would use, to design my drums and to get like a nice snappy punchy sound, what I would do is I would use a lot of amplitude enveloping. And one way to do that is to use a compressor with like the attack. Actually, I'm just going to demonstrate this. It's going to be easier to demonstrate than explaining it. I'm just going to pull up an acoustic kick. This doesn't really have that crazy snap of a transient. So let's see it's not on my drum. All right, so we have this kick sample. Here's an example of something that I would do to make this kick sound better. Let me throw this into the drum rack, bring it up. So I like, it's a mediocre sounding kick. One of the things that I like to do to make it a little bit punchier, if it doesn't have a nice snap, is I'll do pitch enveloping. It makes it sound tighter. It also changes the, because it's transposing it over the course of a very short amount of time. You could just get some really interesting effects and shape drums pretty drastically with just simple pitch enveloping. So I'll have the attack very low, which is the lowest value you can go without it being 0. And I'll have the decay around, very short as well. And as I increase the amount, you can hear what it's doing.
Really creating that like punch, snap, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, so it's kind of like transient designer. So at this point, I'll turn the filter on and I'll do the I'll switch it to OSR or anything that brings up the drive. Bring the drive up. And let's say I don't like all that noise in the background. What I'll do is I'll go to the filter envelope, I'll turn the filter envelope on, and I'll bring the frequency down to where I don't hear that noise anymore. It's around 300 hertz. And then what I'll do is I'll bring up the filter envelope, the amount. And now little tweaking, I effectively preserve the transient, but filtered out all that other noise. And at this point, I mean, so I'm kind of clipping. What I'll do is use a saturator and then turn on the soft clip. It's effectively a limiter, and I have to turn the whole thing down. So yeah, I mean it's just one of the ways to create a punchy drum from a mediocre sample.
Yeah, so I suppose kind of going off on a slight tangent, but something I'm curious about. So, what motivated the switch to Ableton? Because I personally been using Ableton for ages, and I'm a huge fan. But yeah, how come that happened? Yeah.
Okay, so I've been using Logic. I was using Logic for about 9 years since I got Logic when I was 13, and then decided to switch over almost 3 years ago now. And the reason why is because I had friends such as Fractal that were using Ableton, and I just saw how fast he was able to do all of this stuff, and I was like, damn, that's some serious workflow. And what really made me want to switch were two things I did not like about Logic. When my projects got really big, what ended up happening was I couldn't automate things the way I wanted to. Automations would get stuck. For instance, like if I had an automation curve like this, if I started the play ahead, if I had this playing through and then I stopped the play ahead here and then decided I wanted to play from the beginning again, that parameter value would still be where the automation was before. So what I'd have to do is I'd have to actually like scrub the playhead back over to the beginning for it to register that it wasn't actually on that value anymore. So that was super annoying. And for a lot of plugins and third-party plugins, the automations were steppy. Like I could actually hear like it was like 64th note stepping. It wasn't smooth at all. And I was like, this does not sound good. And then the other thing over the years just really bothering me was there was no plugin search or no browser search essentially. Like now, if I want a plugin, I can hit Command F and then just type in the first 3 letters of anything that I want, any plugin, any sample, anything that I want, and then just hit enter and bam, it's right there. Same goes for if I want to bring up an automation if I want to automate a parameter, I can just right click it and hit show automation. With Logic, I had to go through drop down lists and then other lists and lists, and there were so many times where I was in the middle of flow and I would be like, okay, I need this, and so I'm looking for it, and then I totally forget what I'm looking for, and I'm just like, wow, that's unfortunate. And then I lost the flow. So I was, I dabbled with Ableton a little bit before I decided to make the big switch over. So I kind of understood how it was laid out and everything. But the big thing that allowed me to switch was I switched studios. So I switched studio places, and I renovated this space right here and decided to make like an actual studio. I guess when the studio was done, I told myself, I kind of just make a full song with Ableton and not use Logic until I'm done that song, however long it would take. And I feel like the transition of studios spaces kind of helped me, I don't know, it just kind of helped me transition with DAWs. The first song that I finished and created with Ableton was actually Atlantis, and it took me 3 days, and I was really surprised how inspiring and conducive to creativity it was. And I was like, I never looked back. I don't like using Logic anymore. I don't even really know how to very well anymore. And I am more than happy I made that switch. You have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone in order to grow, just in general. So it was at that point I was willing to do that.
Do you use the Ableton Push or any other hardware with your productions?
I don't. I've never even tried the Push. I'm really curious about it because quite a few of my producer friends told me how it has helped them with their workflow, and how it's conducive to creativity. So it's definitely something I want to try, but all I really use for hardware is a MIDI keyboard, or like even like the Nano Key, or just the computer keyboard. I don't really have anything. Very, very basic studio setup. It's just MacBook, monitors, interface, MIDI keyboard, and that's it.
If you can get the Push, get the freaking Push. push. Like it is incredible, dude. But let's say for right now, an easy fix, and I've told a couple people this, and it's absolutely incredible, especially if you're on the road a lot and you don't really want to bring the push with. I saw on your Facebook the other night you got what did you get on your iPad? It was pretty cool. It was
so yeah, I got an iPad mini, and it was kind of a troll video. The video made it look like I was running Adobe After Effects natively on the iPad mini.
Okay.
But what I was doing, I was using TeamViewer and remote accessing my computer in Colorado, which was running After Effects. But it was running smoothly, so that is in itself really cool.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, there's this app called Touchable. It churns your iPad into a push. It's incredible, dude. Like it's insane. And so I've used it quite frequently when I'm on the road. I'll pull that up and it works perfectly. You can pull up a drum pad, you can pull up the 64 isomorphic pad.
Are you familiar with Touch OSC?
Yeah.
So it's similar to that, right?
Exactly. It's extremely similar to that.
Sweet, because that was my main incentive actually for getting the iPad Mini, was to use Touch OSC, or I'm trying out Lemur, but it's a little weird. But I want something a little bit different from Touch OSC, maybe a little bit more in depth. But Touchable.
Touchable is what you want, man, because you can do anything you want. It's super cool. So you can actually like pull up an XY pad on your iPad and have a little ball that you can like move around or whatever. You can touch and move around, but you can throw it and it will just go in all random directions. And so let's say you map that to like a wavetable position and you just throw it. It's like super cool, man. So you just record that in and oh dude, it's
this is literally the middle ground between these two apps that I have that I've been looking for. Like this, I feel like this is what I'm looking for. So I'm totally gonna check this out. So thank you.
Yeah, dude, I think it's like $12 or $15, but it is, dude, it's freaking amazing. So you can connect it two different ways. You can go through like obviously like a USB, or you can go through your Wi-Fi, or you can create an ad hoc network. So you can basically connect it anywhere, anytime.
So it has USB connectivity as well.
Absolutely.
Live sets are going to change.
Yeah, dude. So like when you're on the airplane and you just like, man, I need plug that in, and now you have everything you need right there, man. It's and live sets. Crywolf, you know Crywolf. I noticed when I went to his show, so in order for him, because he does everything off Ableton Live as he performs, so he had to have someone come out on stage with a flashlight and press launch on his scene to get everything rolling. I was like, man, that sucks. And so I messaged him and was like, Touchable. And he's like, oh my gosh, like this is insane. I'm like, yeah, because you can be in the backstage and be like, and now it's time to start. And everything can just start. And live sets, this can be insane for you, man.
I'm stoked. Thank you for recommending this.
Was there anything you did in this track that I suppose is technically like breaking the rules or unconventional, but kind of worked in the context of this?
In my opinion, I feel like the song is actually really generic. There's not really anything that was like that I did that was kind of unorthodox. I'd say mastering is just like super basic. Some EQ, some multiband compression, and some harmonic exciting with ozone, and then the Pro L.
I noticed something, if I can bring something up really quick. So something that I'm noticing that you're doing that isn't completely common, especially in a bass producer's project file, is literally everything, not literally everything, but I see a lot of things still in MIDI. I'm not seeing a lot of things in audio, and you're even mastering in the same session. To me, that's strange. That's not common, because most of the time people are like, okay, let's convert this to audio, let's stem this out. After I mix it, I'm going to bounce that out and pull it into a mastering session. So why do you do that, Austin Collins?
I think the reason I did this in this session is because my CPU never stunted the growth of the song. I think the reason why is because there isn't anything that I'm doing that is overly complex. All of the sounds are pretty much straightforward, and all of the processing that I'm doing on the sounds is just with Ableton plugins. I'm pretty sure. Like it's just Serum and then stock Ableton plugins, and it's not really didn't slow down my CPU at all, I don't think. And I never really had the incentive to convert anything to audio. But there is one thing though, this grindy track. I guess this is the most unconventional thing that I've done in the song. Creating this sound is actually, I took a bass from another song of mine, which is not something that is released yet. Let's see, it originally sounded like this. It's basically just this sound. Took that sound and then I warped it. I stretched it out, and I used the texture warp mode to stretch it out. But I adjusted the grain size to tune it to the frequency of the actual bass, so it effectively sounded like this. So it sounded stretched out. Actually, I have some other stuff going on over here. I have a bunch of stuff going on over here. So yeah, so I took that sample and I stretched it out and it just sounded like this. And then the next thing I did was put auto pan on it to give it some amplitude LFO. And then
that's how you did that. Okay. So I was wondering. Sorry, keep going.
and then I EQ'd it, so I cut out the sub and this low mid range, and then saturator, and then the ozone. The saturator and the ozone compression is outside of this chain. So I created the chain after I filtered out the low end, and then I reintroduced a sub using operator. So that's what it sounds like combined. And then the saturator after the chain allows me to saturate both the sub of the operator and the top bass together. It just glues it together a little bit more. Can't really hear it.
That saturator with the medium curve, that's what I'm talking about. That makes drums or whatever punchy.
It doesn't really sound that much different, but if you look at the level, it keeps the levels a little bit steadier and prevents it from clipping.
Gotcha.
If I use the soft clip, it'll actually just flat out not go over 0, which is probably what I should have had on in the first place. But anyway, and then after that I used, let's see, this is actually Ozone's Exciter, do even more saturation but multi-band. So that's what it sounded like then. Then I rendered it out as audio, and because I liked the sound of it, but what I wanted to do was I wanted it to sound more digital and less like evolving, because this sound, it's not just like one static sound that is oscillating. What I ended up doing was rendering that sound audio, and then let me take these effects off. I rendered it out as audio, and then I took the last 16th note and duplicated it, so it gave it more of like that machine gun effect. Like that. Oh yeah, and then I reintroduced the auto pan to give it more of a pronounced LFO, amplitude LFO. So that versus this. I just thought this sounded way more hard. Threw a saturator and dimension expander on it, and that became the sound. So I guess that is the most unconventional thing that I did in this song. Everything else is still MIDI and pretty straightforward.
My final question for you is,
if you could go back in time and you were sitting with yourself as you started this Skrillexy thing project, and you could kind of give yourself some pointers or some things to look out for or some advice, what would you say to yourself to making this just go much smoother and easier?
This is one of the songs that it came together very quickly. I had fun with it the whole time. I feel like this song is actually like the epitome of a good session where I'm not overthinking anything. Any other song, I feel like my answer to that would be more along the lines of stop overthinking things and stop looping things, stop getting caught up in what other people are going to think of it. The whole point of the song was kind of like, just make a banger. This was just purely for fun. I really didn't even expect it to turn into like a releasable song. I think this song is still too new to give an answer to that. I don't think I would do anything different.
do you want our feedback on your song?
That would be awesome. Yeah. I'd love to. Yeah. Any kind of feedback.
I can't really think of any feedback about the song in particular, but just one thing that sprung to mind I just thought about. So you know how you were creating those wavetables in Serum? I can't remember the details, but I think in the manual it tells you the best note to choose so that it converts to a wavetable in the most efficient way. If you're curious, it might be worth digging through the manual. I must admit, I can't remember the best note to use. But yeah, I think Steve Duda did the maths and worked out there's like depending on how you do your notes, there's like the most efficient note to use, but then there's also a slightly easier note to use that also converts well. So yeah, it's worth when you get like 5-10 minutes free one day, just kind of dig right to the very end of the Serum manual. I mean, the manual's a little bit out of date, but all the maths is still correct. Never know, it might give you that tiny amount more fidelity. Not that I suspect you've been running into too many problems, but yeah, it's worth checking out.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because actually I vaguely remember a while ago reading about like how to use the wavetable editor and formula parser. You can have a maximum of
256 cycles. Yeah,
a maximum amount of samples that you can use per frame, and I thank you for reminding me. And I'm sure like the easier way would be like the nearest note to that one that doesn't go over. I'm gonna figure that out and use that, because yes, importing wavetables with the highest fidelity is something I want to strive to do.
From my feedback, so I have a couple of things I wanted to talk to you about. Number one is I love that this song didn't have vocals, but I can't help but wonder what this song would have been like, even if it had minimalistic vocals. Was there a reason why you didn't have vocals in here?
I think there was just so much stuff going on. It was just so full already that I think adding anything to it would take away from it. Because the main, I feel like the melodic motif of the song, which is the dun 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 dun, dun, that part kind of held its own weight. I mean, I always have the tendency to like layer more melodic stuff and whatnot, but I wanted to keep it simple. And I think keeping it simple made it so I just filled everything up as much as it could be without it being too much.
No, okay, that totally makes sense. So in the future, so maybe not in this instance because there was just, maybe there was just too many chefs in the kitchen. But in the future, let's say, because I personally, I love vocals, especially female vocals when it comes to bass music. Like I don't know, there's just something about that resonates with my soul. Let's say that you're hanging out in your Denver, Colorado apartment and you're like, I don't really want to call anyone, or you don't know anyone, or you're just like, what do I do? Have you ever heard of Vocalese from Heaviosity?
Yes, I have it actually.
Okay, is it not like one of the best things ever created?
To be honest, I only got it just for a couple of the pad presets. I haven't really delved into what it has and what it could do.
Dude.
But now, I haven't used it in a long time, so it's like, now that you're telling me that this is like, I need to check this out.
Let me put an image in your head. Let's say that you go hiking in like the beautiful snowy mountains of Russia, and you get in this, in this crazy snowstorm, and you're like, oh man, I'm gonna die. And then like this lady just pulls you out of the snowstorm. She like brings you back to health, and she has the most beautiful voice you've ever heard. Now imagine if someone recorded that and you can call it back whenever you want. That's what you have on your computer right now.
That is the ultimate instrument.
And by the way, they actually just came out with Vocalese 2, so if you ever want it, go check it out.
Do you know if it's separate from the first one, or is it like an upgradable thing?
I think it's second from the first one, if I'm pretty sure. You might have to check me on that. I hope it's an upgrade, dude. If it's an upgrade,
yeah, that would be great.
So that's my first thing I want to talk about is, if you ever need some female vocals that's just like gorgeous and that you already have, Vocalese is insane. Number 2 that I want to talk about is what you showed me, and then I expanded on it when we hung out one time. So you showed me how you did your sidechain bus, and this really, really intrigued me. And so, but when you showed me, you were using Volume Shaper. Okay, is that what you primarily use now?
That's what I use nowadays, yeah.
Okay, so what I did was I took your idea with Volume Shaper and your three band crossover that you gave me, and I combined them. So what I have now is a return channel for a full sidechain, which is all the frequencies, a sidechain channel that does lows and mids, and then one that just does lows. I set all of them up the same way through MIDI, kind of like what you're doing now, so that I can audition things on the fly, whether I want them to be fully sidechained or I only want like the mids and the lows cut out, or just the lows cut out.
Oh, I see.
And so that way, so I go and I put in all the MIDI, so the MIDI doesn't change. So like, let's say, on this instance, you have your bass channels, you have it set to sends only, but instead of having just the one return channel, I have 3. And so I can go in and be like, do I want it all fully sidechained? And I turn it all the way up. Okay, there's that. And then I go to the other one. It's like, do I just want the mids and lows? And I turn it all the way up. And I can see what I want. You know what I mean? And I can do individual channels too. So like, for example, most of the time with my basses, it's a full one. Most of the time with my vocals, it's just the lows. Most of the time with my mids, it's the mids and lows. Does that make sense? It's like...
Totally does. Oh, and I guess you can automate those too if you want to have them like at different sections instead of just one return channel throughout the entire song.
Exactly.
That is a really sweet idea. I never thought of doing that before. I don't know why.
Yeah,
that's such a cool idea, and I would love to try that, especially incorporating that in an auto load. Like I can just open up a new session and it's already there. That sounds cool.
Other than that, dude, that's all I got, man. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, my pleasure, guys.
Dude.
Fantastic. Do let us know in the comments below if you like this new editing style. And as usual, do send us an email if there's anyone you want to see on the show. And we will catch you guys on the flippity flip.